Phones vibrate on desks that haven't cooled from the summer heat. There's a clipped message in the incident channel. Unusual activity on ProdDB, possible credentialed access. Someone kills the music in the war room and the fan hum becomes too loud. We're looking at a service that advertises discretion as its core product, privacy as a subscription, secrecy as a feature. It's July 2015, and on the other end of our screen sits Ashley Madison, famous for the tagline everybody knows and nobody can admit to using. The promise is confidentiality. The business runs on a quiet pact. And tonight that pact is snapping. A new alert lands, not noisy, just precise. Database reads spike from a source that should be internal but isn't logged as such. Then a text file appears where it shouldn't. An intruder's note, tense and moralizing, unsigned but deliberate. The demand is simple and absolute. Shut down Ashley Madison and its sibling property or face the wholesale publication of user data. No back and forth, no negotiation instructions, just a countdown implied by audacity. Somewhere between the database and the discourse, the attackers have already moved, already staged, already finished. We page legal, we page payments. We page the people who never sleep, because their job is to be awake for everyone else. Triage becomes ritual. Isolate suspected hosts, snapshot memory, seal off egress we can see, hunt for the egress we can't. Engineers who've held secrets for an entire customer base now brace for a secret they can't hold. The hardest part isn't the scope, that will be bad, it's the target. A platform built on the idea that two people can carry a quiet affair is facing the loudest possible breach. In the chat, someone drops a link to a paste. It's not a full dump, not yet. Just enough to prove access, enough to make us understand that the exfiltration isn't a bluff. Username patterns, partial card billing details without full numbers, hashed passwords that look like bcrypt at a glance, profile metadata with preferences most people never say out loud. The note calls itself the voice of the Impact Team, a name that sounds like a corporate training seminar, until you realize it's a mouth-to-microphone threat. And it's here. Public Relations drafts two statements at once, one for if this ends quietly and one for if it doesn't end at all. But inside the war room, we don't have time for the outside voice. We are counting servers, not sentiment. We are tracing logins that shouldn't have been possible. And we are realizing the attackers haven't just cracked the door. They've sat in our living room. The trust calculus flips. We don't ask what we can save. We ask how much is already gone. Minutes stretch into an hour the way they only do when you must report even as you remediate. Leadership wants scope. Customers want invisibility. Law enforcement wants evidence. Somewhere in that triangle, you pick one and move. The decision is brutal in its simplicity. Prepare for the data to surface. Not an if, only a when. And once you accept when, you begin the real work. Bind the blast, preserve what truth you can, and tell it straight when the moment comes, because the harm now is going to come from the intersection of exposure, shame, and opportunistic crime. That is the starting pistol. This is the Ashley Madison Breach in present tense, in a room with too much fluorescent light and not enough oxygen, with terminals that now feel like windows instead of shields. The next weeks will turn private lives into open files, test how we talk about victims we do not want to admit are victims, and force a company built on secrecy to face the anatomy of its own systems with the world watching. The breach is on, the clock is already running. Before the breach becomes a headline, Ashley Madison is a business model built on a paradox. It promises connection in the shadows and it monetizes the assurance that the shadows are safe. Operated by Avid Life Media in 2015, the platform's growth comes from a pitch that is both cultural and technical. Your desire won't be judged, your data won't be exposed, your payments won't betray you, and your profile can vanish for a fee if that's the service you want. The product is privacy flavored as discretion, which means the threat model is harsher than most. If a sports forum gets breached, people get angry. If a site built around marital secrecy gets breached, people get endangered. Even in the neutral language of infrastructure, the stakes are distinctly human. A profile on a dating site for affairs is more than a username. It's an admission of intent, a conversation log, a map of preferences, a fingerprint of location and device. The database isn't made of tables. It's made of lives that depend on those tables staying unlinked from real names. Risk sits on the other side of every column. Email addresses that may be pseudonymous, billing addresses attached to real households, IP logs that sketch out patterns, and tiny bits of metadata that, when stitched together, tell a story louder than any headline. That's why this incident matters beyond sensationalism. It exposes the cold equation that companies in the intimacy business must solve. To run a personalized service, you must collect data. To defend trust, you must minimize, compartmentalize, and harden that data beyond the norm. Ashley Madison sells a full delete option meant to erase traces of membership. It markets discretion as a core differentiator. Those claims are now stress-tested by an adversary with both moral framing and technical capability. And the outcome will force regulators, engineers, and customers to interrogate what deletion, secrecy, and security actually mean in production systems. The brand's cultural footprint also sets the stage for weaponized outrage. Media outlets know this story will trend not because of cryptography, but because of the collateral drama at the intersection of sex, secrecy, and technology. That coverage can help victims or hurt them depending on tone. Meanwhile, cybercriminals who have nothing to do with the initial breach will immediately see fresh revenue lines. Blackmail emails harvested from the dump, credential reuse for account takeovers, targeted phishing that leverages shame as a lever. The breach becomes both a singular event and a commodity supply chain. On the company side, the pre-incident narrative is rooted in growth and platform features. There are efforts to expand internationally, spin up companion services, and tune acquisition funnels that balance privacy with the friction of verifying humans. There are payment processors and billing descriptors designed to be unremarkable on statements. There are marketing campaigns that traffic in taboo. And there's the quiet internal belief that security is sufficient because nothing catastrophic has yet happened. The breach will invert that belief. It will reveal that however strong individual controls may be, the overall posture must match the uniquely sensitive nature of the data. So when the attackers show up, they aren't just attacking a network, they are attacking a promise. And that makes the fallout different. It's not simply about records and fines, it's about lives that can be changed or destroyed by association. That is the backdrop against which the incident unfolds. And it's why the Ashley Madison breach is taught, dissected, and remembered as one of the most complex mixtures of technical failure, ethical controversy, and human damage in the last decade of cyber attacks. It starts with quiet persistence before it becomes public. Weeks before anyone outside notices, attackers gain sustained access to Ashley Madison's internal environment. The exact first foothold is never definitively acknowledged in public forums, but what becomes clear is that the adversary is operating with privileges that look indistinguishable from an insider. They move laterally, inventory data stores, and stage exfiltration pathways that blend into normal flows. By the time a warning note appears on select systems, the real operation is already done. The note is not a boast. It is the closing of a chapter written off-site. On or around mid-July 2015, a manifesto-style message surfaces, asserting that the Impact team has stolen complete copies of the database and now demands the site's shutdown. The note pairs moral condemnation with technical leverage, naming specific properties and threatening a catastrophic release. Internally, Avid Life Media confirms that an intrusion has occurred, and public statements emphasize investigation and cooperation with law enforcement. But the threat has its own timeline. The Impact team indicates that unless Ashley Madison and its affiliate are shuttered, they will publish the data. The clock begins to tick in the court of public attention. In the weeks that follow, the company refuses to comply with the demand to erase the platform. It is both a business decision and a protest against coercion. The attackers respond not with negotiation, but with disclosure. On August 18, 2015, the first significant data dump appears on the internet, distributed via peer-to-peer channels. It contains millions of user records, email addresses, profile details, hashed passwords, partial payment information such as billing names and last 4 digits, and other metadata. The sheer volume transforms the breach from a rumor into a world event. Newsrooms spin up. Security researchers begin slicing the data, warning about password reuse and validating the consistency of the leak. 2 days later, on August 20th, a second, larger dump follows. This included corporate emails, source code artifacts, and further internal documents. Among the emails are messages attributed to senior leadership that fuel headlines and ultimately, leadership changes. The narrative shifts from, if this is real, to what within this is real, what is misunderstood, and who is going to be harmed next. The pace quickens outside the company too. Opportunistic scammers begin sending extortion emails to addresses in the dataset, threatening disclosure to spouses, employers, or communities unless payments are made in cryptocurrency. Where the impact team claims ideology, others adopt pure commerce. Law enforcement activity becomes visible. Investigators in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere coordinate with the company. A public reward is announced for information leading to the identification of the attackers. The reward signals gravity and invites tips. It also acknowledges that attribution will be hard. In the background, Avid Life Media spins up crisis communications to distinguish verified facts from rumor. They note, for instance, that email addresses were not universally verified during account creation, meaning that the mere presence of an address does not prove a person's membership. It's a necessary nuance, but a feeble shield for those named in the dumps. By late August 2015, leadership transitions occur. The company enters a posture that mixes arrogance with insistence that it will continue operating. In parallel, regulators open files. Privacy commissioners and consumer protection agencies begin formal inquiries into the adequacy of the company's safeguards and the accuracy of its marketing around features like full delete. Over the next year, these investigations culminate in reports that identify shortcomings, require remedial action, and set the baseline for settlements and compliance orders. The incident remains in the news cycle long after the last torrent seed fades because its consequences unfold in waves: technical, legal, social. In the months and years after the dump, the secondary effects continue. Class actions consolidate and negotiate compensation funds. People whose data appeared in the leak report harassment, blackmail attempts, and in some cases life-altering personal outcomes. Credential sets harvested from the dump are tested against unrelated services, leading to account takeovers elsewhere. Media retrospectives pick over the dataset itself, recounting how password hashing slowed but did not prevent significant cracking efforts, and how unverified fields muddied attribution. The original perpetrators do not surface with clear fingerprints that satisfy the public's appetite for closure. And in that absence of neat endings, the story becomes a case study. It is less a completed crime than a new template for how data breaches weaponize stigma at scale. Strip away the headlines and the breach looks like many others at the mechanical level. Obtain privileged access, map the environment, exfiltrate the crown jewels, and plant a narrative. The edge that makes this one different is not a never-before-seen exploit, but time, access, and intent. From the vantage of incident response artifacts and subsequent public analyses, the entry vector appears to have involved credentialed access that let the intruders move like staff. Whether those credentials were phished, reused from another compromise, or provided by someone with an axe to grind, the effect is the same. Controls designed to flag anomalies have a smaller signature to detect when the actor looks legitimate. Once operating with internal-level permissions, the attackers demonstrate methodical reconnaissance. They enumerate database servers, staging hosts, and code repositories. Lateral movement likely piggybacks on shared administrative pathways, and insufficient network segmentation. Production, test, and internal systems exhibit porous boundaries that make it easier to copy entire datasets rather than slice selectively. In practice, that means the intruders can lift user tables, payment metadata, and profile information at volumes that indicate full logical copies rather than cherry-picked extractions. From an IR perspective, the copy times and compressed file sizes suggested premeditated data packaging. Password storage at Ashley Madison uses a slow hash algorithm on user passwords, bcrypt, intended to resist rapid cracking. That's good practice. But even strong hashing lives downstream of the weakest link, which is user choice. Millions of users choose weak common passwords. Over time, and with the application of commodity cracking rigs and dictionaries tailored to human patterns, a meaningful subset of the hashed passwords is recovered. That doesn't mean the hashing was pointless. It means that hashing reduces speed and scope, not inevitability, when confronted with weak inputs and relentless effort. Meanwhile, the dataset includes other elements, password hints, profile text, and dates that can corroborate an identity even when the password remains opaque. On the payment side, full card numbers are not splashed in the wild, but billing names, addresses, and last four digits appear alongside transaction timestamps. In a vacuum, the last four digits aren't sensitive. Coupled with names and addresses, they become a powerful triangulation tool, Throw in login IP addresses and time zones, and you can approximate a person with alarming precision, especially in smaller communities. This is the privacy engineering lesson the breach hammers home. Individually, low-risk fields become high-risk in aggregation. Data minimization isn't academic. It's arithmetic protection against mosaic re-identification. The intruders also understand narrative warfare. They don't just leak files, they annotate their act with a manifesto. They highlight inconsistencies between the company's marketing and its actual deletion practices. The much-advertised full delete feature, sold for a fee, purports to purge a user's presence. In reality, deletion workflows leave artifacts, traces in backup sets, entries in financial logs, references in data warehouses built for analytics. That's not malice, it's the everyday difficulty of making deletion thorough in complex systems. But when you charge for deletion, difficult becomes deceptive in the court of public trust. The attackers exploit that gap by calling it out explicitly. From a control standpoint, several defensive layers either underperform or are absent. Network segmentation is insufficiently strict, allowing a single compromised beachhead to browse too many assets. Privileged access management is inconsistent, so service accounts and admin credentials represent juicy targets. Logging exists but lacks the correlation and retention strategy to make post-hoc analysis easy, without enormous effort. Encryption at rest may protect particular tables or fields, but keys are managed in ways that, once an actor is inside, can be found or derived. And the most important gap is cultural. The organization's security posture does not scale to the intimacy of the data it holds. Strong enough for a normal site is not strong enough when exposure invites ruin, rather than mere inconvenience. Exfiltration tradecraft is competent. The attackers likely stage data slices locally, compress and encrypt them, and then move them through channels that blend with legitimate traffic or exit through paths that aren't centrally monitored. The presence of multiple large torrent releases after the fact suggests that the attackers wanted resilience in distribution, no single point of takedown. The size and diversity of the dumps, including corporate emails and code artifacts, indicates broad access rather than a narrow database-only theft. That breadth implies time on target, not a smash and grab. The publication mechanics turn the breach into a self-propagating event. By hosting the dataset in ways that make mirror creation trivial, the attackers ensure that takedowns are symbolic. Security researchers who might otherwise remain observers feel compelled to analyze what's now unstoppable to warn the public about password reuse and phishing. Journalists download archives they would never dare store on company laptops 5 years earlier. The data's longevity becomes part of the technical reality. Once out, it's effectively permanent. Sanitization is impossible. The only remaining defense is context and education for those whose names appear within. All of this sits atop the quiet reality that for many of the site's users, validating the truth is itself risky. The platform does not enforce verified emails consistently, so some addresses belong to people who never created accounts. Spam traps, practical jokes, or malicious signups by third parties. That nuance requires careful public handling, but nuance rarely survives the first day of a breach like this. The attackers know that. They design the leak to be maximum blast with minimum friction. The code they write is less important than the chord they strike. A data set that injures reputations on contact and empowers secondary criminals for years. The immediate shock is a headline, but the real impact unfolds in inboxes. People around the world receive emails that blend gloating with threat. "We found your account in the dump," the messages say. "Pay us or we contact your spouse, employer, or church." The amounts vary. The cryptocurrency wallets rotate, and the senders are almost never the original attackers. Opportunists flood into the breach's slipstream because shame is a scalable monetization strategy. For many recipients, the fear isn't just exposure, it's the loss of control. Even those who never created an account but share a name or an unverified email in the dataset get swept into the panic, forced to defend themselves against a negative that cannot be definitively proven. At work, the breach becomes fodder for rumor and HR nightmares. Corporate email addresses appearing in the dump invite disciplinary threats and, in some cases, unjust accusations. Security teams scramble to explain that an email field is not a conviction, and that many services allow sign-up with unverifiable addresses. But context has poor traction against viral spreadsheets circulating internally. The more responsible organizations use this as a springboard to talk about password hygiene and phishing defenses. The less responsible quietly monitor office chat for gossip. Meanwhile, attackers probe for credential reuse, taking recovered passwords from the breach and stuffing them into remote access portals, social media, and cloud apps. The media effect is complex. On one hand, responsible reporting underscores the human cost and the dangers of doxing. On the other, certain coverage leans into the spectacle, publishing counts of users by city, highlighting the presence of government domains, and naming public figures whether or not their membership or usage is substantiated. Those stories drive traffic, they also drive harm. There is a tightrope between transparency and voyeurism, and many outlets wobble. The result is a public conversation that both illuminates and injures, reinforcing why breach data tied to private life demands special restraint. On the company side, leadership changes are not just optics. They're a form of accountability and a reset signal to regulators. Avid Life Media faces class actions that allege negligence and deceptive practices, particularly around the full delete feature. Settlements and regulatory consent agreements mandate security improvements, audits, and clearer disclosure about privacy features. Privacy commissioners publish detailed post-incident assessments that read like cautionary checklists. Data minimization wasn't rigorous enough. Access controls were broad. Deletion claims outpaced deletion reality. And security governance didn't match the sensitivity of the data. These findings ripple beyond one company and into an entire sector. One of the most painful impacts is the chilling effect the breach has on victims seeking help. Many people whose data appear in the dump avoid counseling, legal advice, or even basic security remediation for fear of creating a paper trail. That hesitation compounds harm. It also creates a vacuum filled by predatory services promising to erase you from the internet for a fee. Those services cannot deliver what they sell because the data set is already mirrored globally. Deletion from one index does nothing when hundreds more exist. The permanent nature of the leak turns time from a healer into an amplifier if victims don't get credible guidance quickly. From a threat intelligence perspective, the data set becomes a tool for other actors. Nation-state services, criminal syndicates, and tabloid intermediaries alike can mine it for leverage. A person in a sensitive role whose profile appears in the data becomes a blackmail target, whether or not the profile was active or verified. Even whispers of connection can be weaponized to create pressure. That turns the leak into a background radiation source for extortion operations for years, far outlasting the initial blast. It also fuels a cottage industry of search portals that monetize curiosity and cruelty under the banner of public information. The fallout also contributes to changes in consumer expectations. The phrase full delete no longer reads as a customer convenience. It becomes a legal commitment people expect to be cryptographically provable. Users grow more skeptical of marketing that asserts untraceable without describing the deletion workflow, retention schedule, and backup policies underneath. This skepticism pressures other companies to invest in privacy engineering, a discipline that measures data exit paths and designs so-called defense in depth around deletion, not just collection. The Ashley Madison breach rewires the market's sense of what must be explained up front. Internally, organizations across industries treat the incident as a tabletop scenario generator. "What's our Ashley Madison?" becomes a shorthand for the worst-case breach of sensitive categories: medical records, location histories, private messages. It pushes technical leaders to ask awkward questions. If someone demanded we shut down rather than leak, what would we do? If we sell deletion, can we prove it works across analytics, search indexes, cold storage, and logs? If an attacker with moral framing targets us, how do we communicate without validating their narrative or diminishing victims? These are not hypothetical role plays. They are operational readiness tests that mature security programs run because the human collateral is real. Amid the wider consequences, there are individual tragedies. Families fracture. Some people lose jobs. In a few cases, there are deaths where the breach is part of the story people tell afterward. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but the presence of vulnerable people in a data set laid bare ensures that the breach carries weight far beyond balance sheets and consent decrees. This is why the Ashley Madison case sits in training decks under the heading High Impact Privacy Breach. The data sets did not just contain PII, they contained identities that were contingent on privacy. Once that privacy failed, lives reconfigured under duress. The playbook the Impact team wrote, moral framing, ideological demand, and maximal public distribution, has already become a template for future attacks. We see breaches that add a layer of shaming narrative to increase pressure and confuse defenders. Ransom notes no longer focus solely on payment but on changing behavior or policy, real or performative. This blurs lines between hacktivism and cybercrime. It also expands the target set. Any company whose brand promise touches identity, intimacy, or dissent becomes a potential stage for reputational warfare, as much as data theft. At a technical level, privacy engineering matures from a niche discipline to a board-level mandate. Executives are starting to ask not just do we encrypt, but can we prove erasure? What's our data inventory's half-life? Where do we have toxic combinations of fields that increase re-identification risk? The shift is subtle and overdue. It's a move from perimeter defense to lifecycle defense, where collection, usage, retention, and deletion each have controls that assume breach. Regulators will push this along with clearer standards around deletion guarantees, algorithmic transparency for features that claim anonymity, and penalties for deceptive claims about privacy protection. For consumers, the Ashley Madison Breach cements a cynical wisdom. If the data exists, assume it can be exposed. That doesn't mean retreat from digital life, it means recalibration. People adopt pseudonymity tactics more thoughtfully. They compartmentalize identities. They stop using work emails for personal services. They grow more fluent in the language of risk signals and recovery steps. Trust becomes something you can't just market. You must demonstrate it through verifiable practices. Companies that fail to meet that bar will see not just churn after a breach, but preemptive avoidance by the very customers who care most about discretion. For the threat landscape, the data economy continues to be a force multiplier for harm. Massive, persistent data lakes, commercial, governmental, and criminal, mean that any single breach can be cross-referenced with a dozen others to produce targeted coercion. Machine learning systems that were built for recommendation engines can be turned toward de-anonymization and pattern matching in leaked datasets. That raises the stakes for both security and ethics. It also means that organizations can't rely on being one of many. If your dataset intersects with sensitive human realities, you're already special in an attacker's eyes. We also see a cultural evolution in breach reporting. The knee-jerk blame the user framing gives way slowly to a more humane conversation about consent and vulnerability. Security teams, journalists, and policymakers adapt guidelines for covering and responding to leaks involving sex, health, or political identity. The goal isn't to shield companies, it's to shield people from gratuitous harm. And as that ethic spreads, it will make certain extortion techniques less profitable, because public compassion and literacy blunt the leverage of shame. Technically, the next decade will be defined by verifiable computing for privacy promises. Expect cryptographic receipts for deletion, proofs that your record's encrypting key has been destroyed, audited by independent monitors. Expect stricter isolation of sensitive systems, where even internal analytics cannot query raw data without threshold cryptography and purpose-bound access. Expect incident response to integrate victim services as a first-class function, with playbooks that partner with NGOs and healthcare providers to reduce the secondary harms that used to fall outside the scope of IT. And expect the attackers to evolve too. Where the Impact team made a point and left, future actors mix message with money, extracting ransom, pushing ideology, and leaving datasets seeded for prolonged utility. That continuous harm model is the ultimate lesson. A breach is not an event, it is an environment. Companies that treat it as a one-week PR storm will find themselves unprepared for the decade of downstream abuse. Those that redesign around the permanence of leaked data, shaping products, policies, and support accordingly, will not just recover, they will help set a new norm for what responsibility looks like when delete has to mean something you can prove. In the war room, the hour always ends the same way. Tired eyes, a common channel, and the quiet accounting of what we can say for sure. The Ashley Madison Breach begins as a set of alerts and a note from an intruder, but it survives as a mirror we still hold up to our industry. It tells us that sensitive platforms must be built with deletion in mind, not bolted on as an upgrade. It reminds us that strong hashing and good intentions don't stop harm when data design underestimates aggregation risk. And it proves, with awful clarity, that the real blast radius of a breach is measured in the lives it upends, not the bytes it spills. If you run a company that keeps intimate data, medical, sexual, financial, political, let this be the prompt to do the hard, unglamorous work now. Map your data exhaust, shorten your retention, build deletion that propagates, and audit it. Segment your networks until the word flat disappears from your vocabulary. Practice the breach script with legal, PR, and victim support at the table. Don't wait for the manifesto to appear on your servers to write the words you'll need in the worst hour. Write them today, with empathy at the center. If you're an individual listening to this, you're not powerless. Use unique passwords and a manager that makes it easy. Turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere you can, separate identities for different parts of your life. Scrutinize any message that tries to weaponize shame, and if you're targeted, tell someone you trust. Extortion thrives in silence. If your data appears in a leak, remember that a field in a spreadsheet is not a verdict on your worth or your future. You get to decide what happens next, and there are communities ready to help you make the safest next choice. We close this chapter knowing that the dataset is still out there, and the ripples are still moving. That's the nature of the internet and of human memory. But the lesson isn't despair, it's design. We can design systems that protect more and expose less. We can design responses that put people first. We can design a culture that meets breach victims with compassion instead of curiosity. The Ashley Madison Breach is not just a warning, it's a curriculum. And class is still in session. Thanks for sitting with the discomfort and the detail. This has been a tour through one of the defining incidents of our time, told in the present tense because for too many people it still feels like right now. Take what you've heard and turn it into preparation, into policy, into personal practice. Because the next war room is always closer than we think, and what we do today decides who has power in that room when the alarms begin.